Good evening, dear viewer, on this most hallowed of eves. At least I hope it's Halloween. I'm hoping to get this out. It's Halloween, the perfect night full of sweets and frights. The perfect night for something sweet to bite. It's pretty good, actually. So, bear with me here. I have a lot of thoughts about this series, so I have my notes printed out here. This is just a fraction of them. The whole stack is 26 pages total. I had a lot to say. Mostly good things, actually. I really enjoyed this. So, before we can get into something sweet to bite, the first one, there are two prequel stories that we need to get into, and starting with Home Sweet Home, A Candy Mare's Tale. Now, I mean, the image is really small here, but that's because that's about as big as I could make it. It's a very small image on FimFiction, and if I blew it up, it would just look bad. So, this is a prequel that was written after the first few Something Sweet to Bites. We'll get into those later. It doesn't really matter, but just some context. The reason I'm covering it now is because I like to go in chronological order. Just makes things easier storyline-wise. So, it's a short story, so I'll just summarize it here instead of going into too detail like I normally do, so we can get into the real meat and potatoes. It chronicles a tale from ancient Equestria of the Candy Mare's early days as she's terrorizing the North and ponies are starting to go missing. And it's ultimately what leads to the Nightmare Night tradition of leaving candy offerings, as the townsfolk believe that it will keep the Candy Mare from kidnapping and devouring one of their denizens. But it doesn't work forever, it's only a stopgap, which leads us to the next prequel, the pre-sequel, if you will, the most horrible, hearts-warming ever, A Candy Mare Tale. This one was published back in 2022 on Halloween, which is pretty recent as of recording this. It chronicles the tale of how Princess Luna, with the assistance of the Six Pillars, Starswirl the Bearded, Flash Magnus, Miss Main, Samnambula, Frockhoof, and Mage Metalbrook, see, I can remember their names, didn't even have to look at my notes for that. They help Luna bind the Candy Mare to stone by separating her spirit from her body and putting her into an eternal sleep forever. Yeah, you know, forever. And by forever, I mean 1,000 years. Which brings us to something sweet to bite. Finally. Now, you're going to see me reading off of my notes a lot during this probably because there's a lot of things I want to directly quote because I want to do this story justice. There is a lot of good writing and a bit of cliches, but I'm a sucker for 80s and 90s slasher movies, and this series wears its inspiration on its sleeve. You'll see what I mean. Let's set the scene, shall we? It's the night before Nightmare Night in Ponyville, and Applejack is helping her sister Applebloom make caramel apples, and she's gathering firewood. Upon getting back from gathering firewood, she notices that all of the caramel apples that she made have been eaten, along with the apples she was going to dip into the caramel. Immediately thinking that it was Applebloom, she calls into the barn after her sister, but is only met with one word, in a child's voice. Hungry, followed by giggling. Giggling that seemingly comes from the boiling hot cauldron of brown sugar. While Applejack tentatively looks into the cauldron, where she is horrified to see the shriveled, burned remains of her little sister Applebloom covered in caramel. She's a caramel apple, you get it? Applejack instinctively reaches into the boiling hot cauldron, burning herself in the process, but pulling her sister's corpse out. Now, I say corpse because Applejack does try to bring Applebloom into the barn and rinse her off and give her CPR, but it's too late. She's gone. As she's trying to do CPR, though, she hears that same sweet giggling that she heard coming from the pot. And, this time it was followed by the start of a nursery rhyme. Nightmare night, what a fright. In a panic, AJ backs up and falls backwards into the boiling hot cauldron, immediately covering herself in burns, and her skin starts sloshing off as she tries to claw her way out of the cauldron. And through the smoke of her own burning flesh, she finally sees it. Now, I'm going to directly quote this. A face peered out of the smoke. It was huge, its eyes pinwheels of madness, its teeth sharp and pointed. "Give us something sweet to bite," it sang gleefully as it lunged forward. Applejack felt those sharp teeth close around half of her face. One eye went dark as it popped between a pair of sharp fangs. Her shriek faded to a gurgle as the monster ripped away part of her face and throat, chewed and then swallowed the bloody wad of flesh. A sudden burst of adrenaline allows her to scamper out of the cauldron and drag herself into the barn, but nowhere is safe as the candy mare grabs a fence post and pushes it through the door, impaling Applejack, killing her very brutally. But funnily enough, at this point, if I had a nickel for every time I read a grimdark story where Applejack dies by being impaled by something, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot. But it's weird that it happened twice. Well, that was just chapter 1, and I gotta say, so far, I'm really digging it. It's wasting no time getting into the good stuff. The next chapter takes us back a week before Nightmare Night, as the CMC and their classmates are helping Pinkie Pie decorate the town in preparation for Nightmare Night. During this, the girls end up making a bet with Diamond Tiara that they can get more candy than her, without leaving an offering for Nightmare Moon. I'm sure this will go great. While helping decorate the library, the girls escalate their bet and Pinkie Pie catches wind, pulling out a book titled Ye Old Tricks and Treats, which warns that there's more to Nightmare Night than getting a lot of candy, and that the candy offering is actually more important than you'd think. Twilight doesn't really believe it though, since it was for Nightmare Moon, and Luna's no longer Nightmare Moon, so it's fine. So Twilight rips the book out of Pinkie's hands with her magic, causing it to explode and burst into pages. The 3 fillies decide to leave before the argument can really get started, but Sweetie Belle does grab some of the loose pages from the book, sticking them into her bag, before following her friends to their clubhouse. Now, Apple Bloom and Scootaloo are lamenting because they know there's no way that they can beat Diamond Tiara, because the last time they did something like this with the spring Easter egg hunt, Diamond Tiara just got her dad filthy rich to buy her crates of Easter eggs to win the bet. See, now that's your fault. You left a loophole. All you had to say was that they couldn't be bought. Well, not like she would have listened anyway. But Sweetie Belle pulls out those pages she got from the book, which look to have had recipes for candy on it. So she says that, hey, why don't we just use these recipes to make our own candy and win the bet? She can't say it's store-bought when we made it ourselves, which, yeah, okay, I see the logic. Well, that explains why Applejack was making caramel apples. Okay. The next chapter follows Fluttershy as she cowers in her cottage during Nightmare Night, since she is terrified of the holiday. She absolutely hates it. When suddenly there came a knock on her door, followed by a childish giggle. Starting to see a pattern. She walks to the door and gives her usual Nightmare Night greeting of, "Go away, there's no candy here," which was met with silence. But she peers out her window and sees a figure standing out in the fog. Unfortunately, Fluttershy's kindness kind of gets the better of her, and she starts thinking that, well, maybe the pony out in the fog can't talk and they're hurt and they'll need her help, so she opens the front door crack to take a peek out front. Much to her confusion, though, the mysterious figure is gone. So she closes the door and goes back to bed. Nah, I'm just kidding. This is a horror movie. She opens that door wide open to find more nothing. Until behind her, she hears Angel Bunny let out a primal shriek, and she turns around and he's all tweaking as like a primal little ball of fear. She approaches him to try to calm him down, but he bites her before running up to her bedroom. I mean, she's so shocked because Angel's never done anything like that before, so shocked that she almost doesn't hear the third knock at her door. She opens the door ready to give the prankster a piece of her mind, but is silenced by the sudden appearance of a field of pumpkins out in her front yard. But not just any pumpkins, jack-o'-lanterns, all with twisted, painful expressions carved into their faces. She hears a faint giggle from around the side of her house, which scares her back inside, and she decides to close her door and block it with a chair, good thinking, before heading up to her bedroom. But she didn't realize that she left her bedroom window open, so her bedroom is now full of jack-o'-lanterns with the same expressions, and I quote, but that wasn't what froze the blood in Fluttershy's veins. There was a red smear across her bed that was almost black in the pumpkin light. A few scraps of white fur scattered about washed the same hue. Fluttershy might not have noticed it in the gloom were it not for the ponies gathered around the stain. Heads low, the urgent sounds of their chewing and swaddling filling the room. One pony arched back its head, something stringy and red caught between its teeth, ripping slowly before snapping and sending a spray of scarlet liquid across Fluttershy's face. She squeaked in alarm. The liquid was still warm and a little salty as it dribbled down her face and into her mouth. Blood. The creature stood among the jack-o'-lanterns, tendrils of fog from the open window spilling about their hooves. One by one they turned from their meal, and they raised their heads in unison and stared at Fluttershy, mouths set in bloody grins, eyes unblinking. They laughed as their eyes moved over her, the rest of their bodies motionless. Then they started to sing. Nightmare night, what a fright, give us something sweet to bite. As the nearest pony loomed over the prostrate Pegasus, something inside her snapped. With a shout full of guttural anguish and despair, Fluttershy lunged at the distorted pony with a snarl and took a bite out of its nose. The creature flinched, a bizarre, warbling shriek rising from its throat as it backed away. With a howl bordering on madness, Fluttershy plunged through the thickened flames. Oh yeah, her house got set on fire, by the way. She spread her wings wide as she surged over two grinning ponies and out through the open window, flying free into the chill night air. See what I mean? Like, the writing is really good. Like, it makes me want to keep reading. But this isn't a fanfic reading, so... So Fluttershy's house was set on fire, and she decides to head to the library to get help from Twilight. She hammers on the door, but there's no answer until a tiny little figure appears behind her in the remnants of a Halloween costume, Nightmare Night costume, still clutching a bag full of candy in its mouth, but it was also one of the zombified creatures, causing Fluttershy to take to the skies. Everywhere she was met with either creatures dragging themselves around in tattered costumes, or half-eaten corpses of ponies she once knew. She finally lands to rest beneath a tree when she realized that she had a sweet taste in her mouth, despite not eating a single piece of candy. So, it seems like we're dealing with a classic, some kind of zombie outbreak, probably caused by the candy the CMC make. At least, that's my working theory at this point. This story seems to be jumping back and forth between before and after everything goes to hell, and that type of story structure can be really difficult to pull off, but so far I think Something Sweet to Bite has been doing a pretty good job of keeping my interest. So now we're back to following the CMC the day before it all went wrong, which is also the name of the chapter. Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo are at Sugar Cube Corner as Scootaloo starts making candy using the recipes, and she's actually pretty good at it. Meanwhile, Pinkie is going about her business when Twilight comes in and offers her a fixed version of Ye Olde Tricks and Treats that she rebound herself in a form of apology to Pinkie Pie, who jumps over the counter and hugs Twilight as a show that the apology is accepted. Twilight goes to the kitchen where she notices Sweetie Belle and the missing pages from Ye Olde Tricks and Treats and scolds the girl for stealing library property and wasting Sugar Cube Corner's resources just to win their silly little bet. Pinkie suddenly puts a hoof over Twilight's mouth though as she's scolding the girls and stares at the candy, asking if the girls made the candy with the recipes from the book. She suddenly turns to Twilight and says they need to gather up all the candy and leave it at the Nightmare Moon statue immediately. It turns out the story these recipes come from is the tale of the Candy Mare. The mention of the name Candy Mare seemed to cause Twilight to drop the pages and begin helping Pinkie frantically gather up every piece of candy the fillies had made over the last week. The two young ponies rightfully ask, who is this Candy Mare? But we'll go more into that later. Turns out that the sweets that Scootaloo had made were the different confections that Lemon Drop force-fed to all of his victims, and the creation of such treats were explicitly forbidden. Lemon Drop was a unicorn who experimented on children using dark magic and candy, and as a result of experimentation, the Candy Mare was born. Apparently the creation of these recipes were forbidden, which I don't know why they were in the book in the first place, but whatever. I guess it's kind of like a Necronomicon type of thing. If these are forbidden, why did you write them down? Apparently a large part of the reason for the candy tributes to Nightmare Moon was part of some sort of purification ritual to purify the candy to keep the Candy Mare from coming back. Twilight and Pinkie gather up all the candy, put it in saddlebags, and go and leave it at the statue of Nightmare Moon before running off back to town. But then, after they leave, the Nightmare Moon statue is suddenly struck by a bolt of orange lightning, and as the dust cleared, something stood motionless in the smoking crater surrounded by the now empty bag. Something smiled and simply uttered one word, hungry. Oh snap, we're pulling a Friday the 13th part 6. Okay, I see you, Knacker Man, I see you. The next chapter starts on Nightmare Night with Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle going to Sweet Apple Acres to get Apple Bloom for their punishment, which is spending the night at the Golden Oaks Library helping Spike hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. They knock on the front door of the farmhouse, but there's no answer. But they do hear a door slam, so they come to the conclusion that, hey, maybe they're out in the barn. As they head around to the barn, they notice that the barn is damaged for some reason. Yeah, that would be Applejack getting impaled. And call out into the darkness of the barn, and are met with Applejack's voice saying, "Oh, hi girls, so good to see y'all. What brings y'all the way out this way?" As a figure moved towards them from the shadows, but they couldn't make it out in the darkness. So, yeah, the candy mare can mimic voices, which is terrifying. The creature reveals itself with Apple Bloom's severed caramel-coated head, causing two fillies to run towards Scootaloo's scooter and take off towards Ponyville. They make it to the library where Pinkie and Twilight are preparing to hand out candy and burst in to explain what they witnessed at the farm. They thought that bringing the candy to the statue would prevent the candy mare from coming back and would complete the ritual, but somehow the 1,000-year-old Nightmare Night spirit has risen once again to wreak havoc on Equestria. Pinkie runs out of the library screaming at the top of her lungs that every pony needs to get inside and lock their doors and don't come out, but well, they all kind of just brush her off because to them, Pinkie Pie running around screaming is a normal occurrence, let alone on Nightmare Night. Twilight, on the other hand, was more logical and went to go try and convince Mayor Mare to put the town on lockdown, but the mayor doesn't believe her as she thinks it's just an elaborate Nightmare Night prank. Meanwhile, the Candy Mare finds and tears apart Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon in front of the Carousel Boutique. Gotta love comeuppance. But she leaves a nicely wrapped piece of candy on the doorstep, which Rarity takes when she comes outside, unable to see the bloodstains due to the thick fog. Meanwhile, Twilight is still trying to convince Mayor Mare, but she's just not believing it. That is, until the Candy Mare emerges from the fog, soaked from head to hoof in blood, and we get to see her in all her glory. Her mane licorice whips writhe like a nest of serpents, sharp, jagged chunks of candy unsheathed all over her body like curling horns and claws. Tiny mouths opened and closed all over her form, issuing the sounds of childish mirth in a ceaseless babble. She quickly grabs and guts poor little Pipsqueak, poor guy, causing the crowd to be whipped into a panic, stampeding and trampling each other as they desperately try to get away from the danger. Twilight approaches the Candy Mare and orders her to stop, which, weirdly enough, the Candy Mare does, letting go of the ponies in her grasp. "A unicorn," the monster whispered in a single tiny voice, sharp teeth clipping each word. "I used to love unicorns ever so much. They were glorious. They could do anything. I wanted to see them. I wanted to know them. I wanted to be like them." Was that remorse in that tiny voice? And now I am, with a gush of blood and madness from hundreds of tiny mouths, the Candy Mare's entire body morphed into a wall of claw-covered candy tendrils that swerved towards Twilight Sparkle. Twilight used her magic to create a shield to keep the beast from devouring her whole, but a single claw manages to slip through, cutting Twilight's cheek. Twilight then uses her magic to start picking apart the creature as it staggers back, trying to get out of range of her spells. Twilight only pauses when she realizes that the Candy Mare is sobbing. I mean, yeah, I guess it makes sense. The Candy Mare is technically still a child after all. But as soon as she pauses, wings and tendrils start sprouting from the corpse as it desperately tries to get away, and Twilight calls out to any other unicorn in the crowd to help her blast the beast to bits, lest the beast return stronger than ever the next year. All the unicorns in the crowd joined in until the only thing that was left was a small, filly-sized pile of candy, shivering and pulsing amidst the scattered pools of blood and candy. "This is the second time a unicorn has tried to kill me," croaked a voice just on the edge of hearing. The shriveled creature, filly-sized, chunks of candy falling from her body, rose to its hooves. "He smelled a lot like you." This seemed to be addressed to Twilight herself. The Candy Mare's words quivered, but not with anger as one would expect. Rather, her voice and her real fear of a child at their core. One who should have been dead long ago. "He had so much power. I'm not sure there was anything he couldn't do, but he didn't know how to use it. He didn't know how to make friends. All he knew how to do was take, so he took what he needed from others." The Candy Mare really did look just like a filly now, one that was nothing but skin and bones, its face in shadow. Their friendship, their families, their lives, he just took and took and took. He never gave. The candy filly moved in a series of jerks, as if she couldn't make her limbs obey her anymore. The tenor of her voice changed. "But I learned to take as well. I did, and the first thing I took was his wretched life. I've been taking life after life after life for thousands of years. So many sweets. Even your Princess of the Night could only put me to sleep. She couldn't stop me. You think you can do better? I have a question for you. For all of you. What was left of her continued to shrivel and peel away, collapsing in on itself. The Candy Mare lifted her face to Twilight Sparkle, little more than an empty shell of a skull, and grinned hugely as she hissed, "Trick or treat?" After this question leaves the Candy Mare's bony lips, her skull charges at Twilight, but Twilight closes her eyes, ready for the blow, until she hears the sound of a flower pot shattering and the skull hitting the ground. Pinkie Pie to the rescue with a flower pot. Apparently at the last moment she leaped down and smashed the howling skull into the earth. Pinkie ground one of the parts beneath her hooves, with gummy brains grinding everywhere. The victory was short-lived, however, as the Candy Mare's body quickly began to coalesce, with all the pieces of candy crawling back to each other to reform. So, Pinkie declares something disgusting and says there's only one way to get rid of bad candy on Nightmare Night, and begins to eat the pieces of candy from the Candy Mare's body. And the rest of the ponies in the square, Twilight included, join her in her feast, devouring all the pieces of the Candy Mare until there's nothing left. Eating the sentient candy monster does not sound like it will end well. Well, after the Candy Mare's remains had been disposed of, Pinkie, Twilight, and the girls head back to the Golden Oaks Library, and Twilight allows the girls to stay the night since they've been through a lot. The two girls cry themselves to sleep, while Pinkie and Twilight talk down in the library. I mean, they don't technically have to be upset about it. I mean, it wasn't technically cannibalism, it was just candy. Spike burst in through the front door of the library, claiming that there's something wrong with Rarity. Twilight noticed that his lips and most of his face had been ripped off before he collapses on the spot. As Rarity walked into the library, her body now made of marshmallow. Then Pinkie Pie doubles over in pain and explodes, revealing a bubblegum facsimile of Pinkie Pie. The Candy Mare's shattered skull then takes shape in front of Twilight, uttering the same words over and over again. Trick, trick, trick. Well, I did say that eating the sentient candy monster probably wouldn't end well. Twilight races up the stairs to go try to save the girls, where she's met with the now candified Scootaloo and Sweetie Belle, who have been fused together into one entity. Well, at least they went out together. And then Twilight doubles over in pain and turns into a candy monster as well. So, seems to be like a kind of hive mind zombie situation, like they're all under the Candy Mare's control, and anyone who eats the cursed candy turns into a candy ghoul. Which is pretty cool, I can't even lie. We then cut to the palace in Canterlot, with Luna answering the door to a horde of candy ghouls being led by the Candy Mare, who, when she looks down and lays eyes on Luna, asks the same question, trick or treat? And that was the first Something Sweet to Bite. A very well-made one-shot story that builds off the Nightmare Night mythos. I'm a bit disappointed that it ended on a cliffhanger though, but I guess that's the nature of one-shots, right? Whatever, who am I kidding? You see the board, you know this isn't the last one. We're far from done. Like every slasher movie franchise that was meant to be a one-off movie, Something Sweet to Bite eventually spawned its own sequel about a year later, Something Sweet to Bite 2, with 2 O's. Now, Something Sweet to Bite 2 actually starts off with a cute little epilogue that's formatted like a preamble for a play, with Pinkie and Twilight coming out on stage and going back and forth, recapping the events of the previous story. It's honestly really charming. The real story begins, though, with Rainbow Dash, who was oddly absent in the first story, having a graphic nightmare about her former friends and the ruins of what used to be Ponyville, now haunted by the laughter of the Candy Mare. She wakes up from her graphic nightmare to find a letter from Princess Celestia on her table. It's been about a year since the events of Nightmare Night, and Rainbow Dash hasn't been able to face Princess Celestia out of guilt. She also hasn't abandoned her duties as a weather pony for Ponyville, despite the area not really needing her services anymore, and deep down she really knows that, but she can't bring herself to leave out of guilt. But she steps out of her cloud house, and after surveying the ruins of what used to be Ponyville one last time, she takes flight towards Canterlot. Canterlot is no longer the big bustling utopia it once was, as most of its denizens went missing last year during the events of Nightmare Night, and those that remain don't tend to linger in the streets, quickly going from building to building. It's pretty much like a militarized zone at this point. There's guards on every corner, Pegasi on every rooftop, just full alert constantly. And it's getting even worse now that Nightmare Night is just a few days away. which probably means the Candy Mare will be back to finish what she started. Dash arrives at the palace, and the guards allow her to pass, and she's met by the captain of the Royal Guard, who turns out to be Shining Armor, Twilight's older brother. Shining Armor informs Dash that Princess Celestia will be along shortly to greet her, but she's a little busy right now since she's currently in charge of both the sun and the moon since Luna disappeared last Nightmare Night. That's a little foreboding. Shining Armor leads Dash to an old tower in the castle, which the story describes as actually being the tower that Twilight lived in when she was living in Canterlot as Celestia's student. It's a nice bit of continuity with the show. Shining Armor fills in Rainbow Dash on the situation. See, turns out not only Luna disappeared last Nightmare Night, but a sizable chunk of Canterlot's population and the entire population of Ponyville just gone without a trace. Some believe that Luna kidnapped all the ponies that went missing in order to perform some sort of dark ritual to regain her dark powers as Nightmare Moon, but Princess Celestia doesn't believe that. In fact, when Celestia shows up, she believes that Luna is the key to understanding the Candy Mare since she was the one who was able to defeat the beast in the first place. Unfortunately, there wasn't really much evidence that could be gathered from Ponyville, as not long after the events of Nightmare Night, the entire town burned to the ground. But then, the great and powerful Trixie shows up out of nowhere in a grand dramatic entrance, claiming to have an explanation for the disappearances and the events of last Nightmare Night. See, it turns out that Celestia actually invited Trixie to help investigate due to her studies of magic. I mean, I thought it turned out she was a hack, but whatever. Trixie believes that the disappearances are a side effect of a dark ritual that is to be completed on the approaching Nightmare Night. So Celestia wants the group of 3 ponies, along with a group of royal guards, to go down and investigate the ruins of Ponyville to see what they could find about this ritual. Rainbow Dash objects, very loudly by the way, and eventually tells Celestia about her nightmares. Turns out Celestia has also been having similar nightmares, which she believes are Luna's way of reaching out to help through the astral plane. Which, I mean, I guess kind of makes sense. One of Luna's powers is the ability to project herself into dreams, so maybe there's some merit to that. The next chapter starts out with a bang as we see Zecora and Big Mac subduing a now infected Fluttershy before she can devour the Flim Flam brothers. Zecora forces a mysterious vial of liquid down Fluttershy's throat, which seems to calm her and turn her back to normal. More on that later. They grab Fluttershy and leave, warning the brothers of the dangers of the area, but they of course don't listen, and get killed by the Candy Mare. Flim gets dissolved, and then Flam drowns in his brother's liquefied remains. Yeah, normally I would feel bad, but I hate the Flim Flam brothers, so we're moving on. The next day, our trio of Rainbow Dash, Trixie, and Shining Armor, along with a group of royal guards, set out to the ruins of Ponyville, and they spread out and begin their search, but yield nothing. Even after 10 hours of searching, they still don't get anything. Until Trixie hands Rainbow Dash a crystal ball and tells her to fly as high as she can and look at the town through the ball. When Rainbow Dash does, she notices a huge grinning face on the ground. She flies back down and tells Trixie what she saw, and Trixie is immediately worried, saying that it is a powerful curse that not even Celestia will have the power to break. The group decides to set up camp and spend the night in the ruins of the mostly intact Golden Oaks Library, much to Rainbow Dash's dismay. But before they can decide on whether or not to do that, a horde of candy ponies starts coming up out of the ground in the wreckage of the buildings around them and begin to tear apart the squad of guards. Shining Armor erects a barrier to protect the trio, and Trixie theorizes that the candy ghouls may not actually be trying to kill them, simply keep them there from being able to interfere with the ritual. Trixie pulls out the Alicorn amulet and puts it on to use its power to start blasting the ghouls to bits before sending Rainbow Dash back to Canterlot with a message for the princess to send reinforcements. Just as Rainbow Dash thinks she's home free and away from the danger, a licorice tendril comes out of the clouds and scrapes across the right side of her body, leaving deep gashes and injuring her right wing, sending her tumbling down into the Everfree forest. We then cut to Fluttershy, who wakes up from a wonderful dream where she's having the most wonderful feast with all of her friends. She then wakes up with an insatiable hunger in a cage, chained to the wall, in Zecora's hut. So you remember how back in, oh, hey. Come on, tab back in, come on, tab back in, look at your other monitor, okay? All right, thank you. So you remember how in the first Something Sweet to Bite, when Fluttershy was getting attacked by all the candy ghouls in her house, she bit one of them out of instinct? Well, turns out that slowly infected her, but it's more of a slow-going version of the infection, since she has, like, episodes where she turns into a candy ghoul, but Zecora's remedy is able to turn her back and kind of keep her under control, but, it's not a cure. It's more like a Band-Aid fix, But a large crack from outside the hut sends Fluttershy cowering under her covers as she hears a groan and an injured Rainbow Dash wanders into the hut. The sight of Dash's injuries and the smell of fresh blood causes Fluttershy's hunger to grow as she transforms into a candy ghoul and almost talks Dash into letting her out, but she manages to pull the rivets out of the collar, binding her to the wall, and tackle Dash until Big Mac comes in and hits her so hard she goes flying back into the cage before Big Mac slams the door shut. In fact, the injuries that were sustained by the licorice whip and the infected Fluttershy were so bad that it took the better part of the evening to properly clean and dress them. So Zecora and Big Mac have spent this whole time gathering ingredients to help fight the candy plague, as they're calling it. Apparently, part of the Everfree Forest has the special fruit called star fruit that seem to absorb sunlight during the day but then expel it during the night. So they have to be harvested right as the sun sets to get the most amount of sunlight out of them. Now Zecora uses them for the potions that she makes to help Fluttershy, but they're only stopgaps, but they do seem to prove pretty effective against the ghouls. But unfortunately, there really isn't a cure to this. Realistically, the only way to stop it would be to kill the Candy Mare, and that's proven once already to be easier said than done. Dash informs Zecora of the nightmare she's been having, and the Zebra Shaman believes that there might actually be some deeper meaning in those dreams. So she gives Rainbow Dash a potion with concentrated starfruit, causing her to immediately fall asleep and enter a sort of lucid dreaming state where she's aware that she's dreaming. It turns out that Celestia was actually right. It was a result of Luna and the other trapped souls trying to reach out to Dash to get a message to her. As explained by Twilight, who basically says that the Candy Mare is coming back in a big way, and as the last remaining element of Harmony, Dash is the only one capable of stopping her from cursing all of Equestria. See, the Candy Mare gains power from life force, which is exactly what the Jack-o'-lanterns are. They're the souls of those she's infected, trapped inside of the Jack-o'-lanterns that she can feed upon. So Twilight theorizes that if Dash and the others can somehow destroy the Jack-o'-lanterns, they can destroy the source of the Candy Mare's power. Okay? I mean, I see the logic, it makes sense. Twilight can tell that they're being held somewhere dark, which is most likely the castle of the two sisters in the heart of the Everfree Forest. But before they can talk anymore, the Candy Mare takes over the dream, and it ends the same way that it normally does, with Rainbow Dash's friends cooking and eating her alive. I wonder if she tastes like chicken. So in the morning at breakfast, Dash tells the others what she heard in her dream, and they together form a plan to charge the castle of the three sisters during the day. One, because the candy ghouls are at their weakest during the day in the sunlight, and two, Nightmare Night is tonight, which means whatever the Candy Mare is planning will spring into action. Fluttershy volunteers to fly to Canterlot to inform Princess Celestia of the oncoming danger, but the group are hesitant, but they don't really have a choice since Rainbow Dash's wing is busted. So they let Fluttershy go, and she heads off towards Canterlot. Fluttershy does horribly because the curse tends to make her feel horrible in the sunlight, but it's even worse where as she's flying through Ponyville, she barely dodges a red lightning bolt that comes from, Trixie, who's somehow still alive fighting through the night, possibly driven crazy by the power of the Alicorn Amulet. Fluttershy quite literally smacks some sense into Trixie, bringing her back to her senses, and the two then head to Canterlot together. Meanwhile, Rainbow Dash, Big Mac, and Zecora are making their way through the path in the Everfree Forest, where the trees are just littered with empty carcasses and corpses and skeletons and bones cracking under their feet or hooves. They exit the forest to find a giant candy structure in place of the castle, made up of dozens and dozens and hundreds of corpses of candy ghouls, still breathing, still alive, still pulsating. Zecora busts out a homemade flamethrower and drops one of the hardest lines I think I've ever heard in MLP fanfiction. For the sake of our friends who yet live, and those who have died, for all the pony folk, are you ready to walk into the jaws of death and make her choke? That's a bar. Meanwhile, Fluttershy and Trixie make it to Canterlot and give the message to Princess Celestia about the Candy Mare's plan and the curse. And then something shocking happens. Something like doubt flickered in Trixie's eyes. "Oh," she says. "Oh, indeed," said Celestia, the harmony in her voice replaced by a sonorous echo of another, far stranger voice. That's when the guards on either side of her throne brought down their axes, severing Trixie's head from her shoulders. The glow faded from the Alicorn amulet as Trixie's corpse tottered and fell. The look of surprise never left her decapitated head. That's right, turns out that Princess Celestia was actually Chrysalis the entire time. Chrysalis replaced Celestia an unknown amount of time ago and was simply biding her time until she could destroy the elements of harmony. Well, like, 4 of them are dead, so kinda worked out, I guess. Fluttershy starts to lose control of her hunger and eats Trixie's corpse, and her eyes flash with red magic from the amulet because it turns out there may have been some residual magic in Trixie's body from the amulet. And then she charges, kills, and eats Queen Chrysalis. I mean, I'm not gonna say she didn't deserve it. Meanwhile, back in the candy castle that's made of twisted architecture, the trio are burning their way through the castle towards where they believe the jack-o'-lanterns are being held. And they do discover the jack-o'-lanterns stacked in towers below the 2 thrones. On one throne sits the Candy Mare, and on the other sits poor Princess Luna, practically fused to her once throne. Turns out the crazy candy-coated cadaver has been keeping Luna hostage over the last year, slowly siphoning off her powers. When Zecora asks why the monster is so interested in Luna's power, the monster simply answers the question with a question. "Do you really think I'm only interested in this world?" Which is a little concerning. We then cut back to Canterlot, where the changelings are all being hunted down and devoured by the now ravenous Fluttershy, powered up by the Alicorn amulet. She even accidentally stumbles upon the changeling's nest with all pods hanging from the ceiling containing the missing denizens of Canterlot. She starts gnawing on one of the larger pods and releases Princess Celestia, who lets out beams of sunlight that weaken Fluttershy. Meanwhile, back in the Candy Castle, the Candy Mare gives a big villain speech saying that she's going to use Luna's power to complete the ritual and travel into the Dream Realm, where she can then travel between dimensions, devouring countless hundreds of lives, and essentially ascend to godhood. Well, godhood, like lowercase g godhood, like quasi-godhood. Let's not get into philosophy. Big Mac manages to break free of the candy ghouls that are subduing him and subdue the Candy Mare, while Zecora throws Starfruit at her to weaken her, and then Dash manages to reignite the pilot light on the flamethrower and burn the Candy Mare and Big Mac, detonating the powder kegs Big Mac was carrying on his back, causing a huge explosion and a column of blue flame to erupt, destroying all the jack-o'-lanterns and the Candy Mare. But Dash and Zecora find themselves protected by a powerful magical force field as Princess Celestia and her royal guards descend upon the ruins. All is quiet, and it feels as if a great burden has been released off of everyone's shoulders, until they heard the roar that chased after the dying light as the sun set and Nightmare Night begins. Nightmare Night, what a fright. Give us something, yeah, you get the idea, something sweet to bite. You see, the Candy Mare had not only been spending the last year siphoning off Luna's magic, but she'd also spent the last year force-feeding the poor princess pieces of her own body. You may have realized that the Candy Mare is kinda like the Thing or the Flood. All it takes is one piece of candy, one little piece of her to survive, for her to come back. So she comes back possessing the body of Luna in a twisted black licorice version of Nightmare Moon, which in my head looks really fucking cool. The creature makes quick work of all the guards, until Fluttershy comes in with a new insectoid candy form due to her... See, it's apparently she mutated due to the candy curse mixed with the magic from the Alicorn amulet, and the anatomy of the changeling she consumed, so she's a whole new monster entirely not under the Candy Mare's control. She distracts the Candy Mare long enough for Zecora and Dash to free Princess Celestia from her chains, and Celestia blasts the Candy Mare into oblivion, killing her sister and the beast with her. A sacrifice that had to be made, I'm afraid. Psych! It was all a dream induced by the Candy Mare using Luna's dream powers. The story actually ends with the Candy Mare, or what is described as a candy-like fetus bursting from Luna's stomach, who is still alive, by the way, begging to be put out of her misery. As the fetus crawls down Rainbow Dash's throat, You see, that was the secret part of the Candy Mare's plan the whole time. She wanted a body, a real body, a Pegasus body. So we get another cliffhanger as the Candy Mare once again comes out on top. So where do we go from here? Well, to another world, of course, which brings us to the last Something Sweet to Bite. So this installment actually marks a first for me, since it's the first Equestria Girls fanfiction I am covering in one of these videos. And according to the preamble, it was originally going to be titled Equestria Girls Rainbow Rots, which I think is a really good name that someone should probably use someday. I mean, I get why it was changed to the last Something Sweet to Bite, because you want it to be more in line with the rest of the franchise, so it makes sense. So this story picks up not long after the events of Equestria Girls Rainbow Rocks, with the Dazzlings having been defeated by the Rainbooms and are trying to plot their revenge or their next move, when all of a sudden they are approached by a mysterious girl from an alleyway who offers them unimaginable power if they help her with a plan. Well, obviously the Dazzlings are pretty skeptical and they ask, well, what could you possibly have to offer us? And the mysterious cloaked figure pulls a set of glowing empowered amulets to show to the Dazzlings, and well, they have a deal, but on one condition: if the cloaked figure reveals their identity. And upon the figure removing their hood, Adagio Dazzle simply says, "This is gonna be good." We then cut to Sunset Shimmer, who wakes up from a nightmare of standing in an abandoned Canterlot castle. But before she can make any sense of that dream, she realizes that she's going to be late for school. And as she's frantically getting ready for school, she has a craving for something sweet to bite. Like a donut or something, you know. Sunset then finds herself falling asleep during class, where she has a nightmare where she runs into a mysterious child made of candy out in the hallway. Yeah, I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. It's probably just a weird nightmare. Later at lunch, it's revealed that Rainbow Dash is actually running for Princess of the Fall Formal, which admittedly is a little out of character for her, but I guess it is a competition of sorts, and she is very competitive. Fluttershy says that she last saw Dash leading Trixie to the nurse's office, and she didn't look very good. So Sunset makes her way to the nurse's office, where she overhears a disagreement between Principals Celestia and Luna and Nurse Redheart about what to do about Trixie's sickness. Nurse Redheart says that she's never seen anything like this, and it could be super contagious or some sort of new disease, and that the proper authorities need to be notified. Celestia and Luna assure Nurse Redheart that there are proper protocols put in place ever since the magical attacks from both Sunset Shimmer and the Dazzlings, and that there's nothing to worry about, and they don't want to notify anybody to avoid causing a panic. Boy, that's a pretty big horror movie trope, huh? It's like, no, don't tell the cops. No, let's not notify the government. No, it's fine, we can figure it out. Sunset then notices the silhouette of a girl behind a privacy curtain in the nurse's office. She peeks behind the curtain to see Trixie puking her guts out into a bucket, and the contents of the bucket seem to look like a mix of blood and chocolate. And then a glassy-eyed Trixie stares up from the bucket at Sunset Shimmer, saying the typical nursery rhyme of, nightmare night, what a fright, give me something sweet to bite. Take a shot every time you hear that, because you're gonna hear it a lot. Sunset gets shooed away by Nurse Redheart, and then she goes and tells her friends about what she saw, and they say, well, it could just be some sort of infection, a new virus. There's all kinds of crazy viruses out in the world, like Ebola and stuff like that. But Sunset isn't so sure, because she could have sworn that the symptoms Trixie was exhibiting seemed to be almost exactly that from the tale of the Candy Mare. Now, the girls are skeptical to believe Sunset at first, but then slowly do believe her about the curse of the Candy Mare being real. Now, Sunset theorizes that the curse may not actually be the original Candy Mare, but simply a copycat who managed to cast the curse on some students as a form of revenge, most likely the Dazzlings, which I guess, yeah, they're not too far off on that one. So Pinky and Rarity decide to split off from the group and go ask around town if anybody has seen the Dazzlings, while Fluttershy and Applejack go looking for Rainbow Dash, since she was the one who brought Trixie to the nurse's office. Okay, so I'm just gonna call it now. Since the Candy Mare possessed Dash's body at the end of Something Sweet to Bite 2, this is most likely that version of Rainbow Dash being possessed by the Candy Mare who came through the portal and replaced the original Rainbow Dash to spread the curse throughout this new world. Or we could go the complete schizo route, and the whole Rainbow Dash angle is just a complex fake out, and it's not actually that Rainbow Dash. Now that would be crazy. After the group disbands, Sunset gets tased and knocked out by Well, Twilight Sparkle. Okay. You have my attention, Knacker Man. Let me just clear up a few things here. This is a direct sequel to Something Sweet to Bite 2, but you might have noticed some inconsistencies, like how Twilight obviously dies in Something Sweet to Bite, so she never becomes an alicorn to go through and therefore she never goes through the portal to help stop Sunset Shimmer or the Dazzling, so how is any of this even happening? And the answer to that is actually told by Knackerman in the comments of this chapter. Now see, Knackerman actually explains that, and I quote, "This is a different Equestria tied to a different human world. At this point in the series, the Candy Mare has completely devoured her own Equestria and was forced to start spreading to alternate universes using Star Swirl's mirror portals." Which does make sense, since the Candy Mare was planning to branch out into different universes through the Dream Realm in Something Sweet to Bite 2. So it's a nice bit of continuity there. Gotta love multiverses, am I right? AJ and Rarity find Sonata Dusk lurking in the kitchen in CHS's cafeteria, and they manage to tackle her and find that her pockets is filled with a bag that has mysterious candy in it. But as AJ inspects the bag and opens it, the candy comes to life and attaches itself to her face, causing her to jump back and hit her head, knocking herself out. The remaining pieces of candy in the bag jump out and latch on the Fluttershy's face, forcing themselves down her throat, causing her to pass out. As Sonata stands over her handiwork, Granny Smith comes in and demands to know what Sonata did to the two girls, but Sonata simply just bonks her in the head with a cleaver. Okay, well that's two girls down. Possibly three if Rainbow Dash is actually an imposter. Meanwhile, Sunset wakes up in a cage being monitored by Saitwai, who apparently believes that Sunset Shimmer is an alien from another planet sent to scour for an invasion. Honestly, it's not that far-fetched of a theory, considering Sunset Shimmer just appeared out of nowhere 5 years ago with, no social security number, no birth certificate, no record of her existence anywhere past 5 years ago, so I guess it's not that weird of an assumption to make. So Sunset tells Saitwai everything. Well, mostly everything. She may have purposely left out the part where she tried to use magic to enslave the minds of the students of CHS to invade Equestria, but that's not really an important detail for this. Apparently Saitwai has been investigating what she calls the student plague and believes it to be the result of the students ingesting some sort of foreign substance, like candy. Meanwhile, back in town, Pinky and Rarity are asking around to see if they could get a read on where the Dazzlings are when they quite literally bump into Aria Blaze, who takes off into the nearby park. They give chase and eventually do find the shack where the Dazzlings have been holed up, and just as Rarity is about to take out her phone to notify the police, Adagio shows up out of the bushes holding Rarity's phone before tossing it into a nearby creek, and Rarity gut checks Adagio before taking off running, but she realizes that she left Pinkie Pie behind, but it doesn't really matter because she doesn't get that far before getting caught by a Candy Ghoul raccoon. Well, that's 3 down, probably 4. Have none of these girls ever watched a horror movie before? You never split up, it just makes you easier to pick off. Well, Sunset is still trapped in a cage in the basement of Crystal Prep, but thankfully, Maud shows up to steal some dog treats for her pet rock Boulder, and Sunset gets her to let her out of the cage, and with a few more treats, she manages to get her clothes back from Spike. She frantically checks her phone and is terrified to see that there are no text messages from any of her friends. You see, they also agreed that when they split up to constantly text each other to make sure they are okay. In fact, the only text that she sees is a group text sent by Rainbow Dash inviting all the girls over to her house since her parents aren't home. Slowly but surely, all the girls agree saying they'll be there, so Sunset hops on a bus and calls Rainbow Dash, who answers the phone sounding normal. So Sunset warns her about the Candy Mare and that their friends may be compromised to a peppermint end. I don't even know if people are going to get that, but I think it's funny. Now, here's something interesting. Sunset goes to Dash's house and everything seems fine. They're watching horror movies, until in the conversation, Rainbow Dash says Nightmare Night instead of Halloween, which Sunset doesn't clock, but I clocked it. So, yeah. Sunset manages to find her way to a closet where she hears muffling, and inside the closet, she finds the real Rainbow Dash. I was right, it is the Candy Mare possessing Dash's body from Something Sweet to Bite 2. I mean, I sound like a smart guy for saying that, but I mean, it's pretty obvious. I just love that these stories actually have continuity. It's great to have an actual plot line. Oh yeah, anyway, the Candy Mare made Rainbow Dash eat her parents. Literally, that's just what she says. Just then, Rainbow Dash walks in with a plate of finger food that turns out to actually be severed human fingers. Do you get it? Do you get it? That's when Sunset realizes that Rainbow Dash said Nightmare Night instead of Halloween. It's an equestrian holiday. The Candy Mare finally drops the facade, and Sunset gets attacked by a candy face hugger. That's really the best way to describe it. It's a face hugger. But the Candy Mare claims that she has bigger plans in store for Sunset and her friends before Sunset passes out as the creature forces itself down her throat. So Sunset wakes up to the face hugger getting pulled off by Applejack, and she's surrounded by the rest of her friends in a dark room, and she takes about an hour to explain the current situation they're in. And she theorizes that due to the lack of magic in this world, the Candy Mare is having trouble manifesting, which is why she needs Rainbow Dash as a host. And that's also why she's employed the Dazzlings to help her with her plan rather than doing it herself. Pinkie Pie reveals that they're actually trapped in the storage room under the stage in the gymnasium. And as if on cue, the lift opens and they're raised up onto the stage with their instruments, as the fall formal is now fully in swing, as the Dazzlings now show up in new deep-sea monstrous forms, as the Candy Mare is honored her part of the bargain, giving them the powered-up amulets. They perform a song that puts the entire student body and the Rainbooms under their spell as they begin to play their instruments, and the Candy Mare shows up, clapping, and says in Rainbow Dash's voice, "I've gotta say, not bad. I'd give it a solid 7, no, 8 out of 10. It could have been about 20% crueler, don't you think?" I have no notes. No notes. This is peak fiction. Also, we're 10 chapters deep into Last Something Sweet to Bite with 13 to go. These stories are long, but that's not exactly a bad thing. So the Dazzlings predictably betray the Candy Mare as Adagio gets into her face saying like, "Hey, we already got what we wanted, so why would we help you get what you want?" And the Candy Mare says, "Yeah, I knew you would, Lamau," and then just like a giant mouth burst out of the Rainbow Dash's arm and just kind of flays all the flesh off of Adagio's head before biting it off. Hey man, she's a bad bitch. I can't lie. Sonata and Aria, upon seeing that, charge the Candy Mare, but that does give the Rainbooms a chance to break out of the spell and start singing a cheesy song about friendship as they pony up and release a wave of rainbow energy that shatters the amulets, reducing the Dazzlings back to their normal girl forms, as the Candy Mare starts breaking apart and writhing is foaming as she struggles to keep hold of her puppet body. In a flash of light, the monster let out one final scream, but after the hollowed out Rainbow Dash cries out that they gave the Candy Mare exactly what she wanted as the crowd erupted into a surge of candy and viscera. Blood and guts were now the primary decorations in the gym. The balloons and streamers splattered with gore. It looked almost as if a bomb had gone off. As pieces of students and teachers twitched and rolled around the floor, still alive, they rolled, wriggled, and clawed, hunks of the dead and candy abominations that had been inside them, all flowing to a single point in the middle of the gym floor. The flow coalesced into something like a cocoon that was instantly wreathed in dense fog. At this point, even the emergency light flickered and failed. All at once, everything was plunged into a darkness putrid with the stench of raw meat and the wails of those who were still not quite dead. It only lasted for a moment, for in that darkness the damp sound of flesh slapping against flesh could be heard. The laughter that had been all around them, taunting their slow demise, faded to a hushed whisper. Like the first light of creation, a single candle flame illuminated inside a grinning pumpkin shell, then another, and another, and another, until the floor was a wildfire of jack-o'-lanterns. A single spotlight shone down upon where the cocoon had been. Had been is the key word. It must be said, for a diminutive figure now stood with arms outstretched, standing on tiptoe in a pose like a ballerina. "Ta-da!" she cried exuberantly. Her flesh was irregular, molted pink, but other stranger shades here and there, veins of a darker hue streaking beneath her unnaturally shiny flesh. Her dress seemed to be made of discarded candy wrappers and cellophane that peeled away from her tiny form. Long red and black hair, slick and slimy, hung limp from her fragile-looking skull. But her face, in her face was only insanity. Her eyes were lollipop swirls of madness that opened wide over a candy corn grin that was stretched to bursting with impossibly sharp teeth. A black and orange candy-striped tongue stuck out playfully from her licorice red lips as she gave a little twirl, feet splashing playfully through puddles of blood and what was left of spilled brains on the floor. This was it then. This was her. this was their plan all this time. The Candy Mare given human form. So as she dances and prances around the gym, the Candy Mare, well, I guess it's just Candy now since she's not a mare anymore, recants the tale of how she came to this world. You see, after consuming all of the magic in Equestria, she started moving on through the dream realm, through the multiverse, doing the same thing to countless Equestrians, until one day she sensed a life force on one of the dead worlds she had conquered, a Sunset Shimmer. Not this world's Sunset Shimmer, but another Sunset Shimmer, who she eats with gusto, but then she gains the knowledge of the mirror portal. The problem is, though, she couldn't go to that version of the human world because, well, she'd already consumed all the magic in Equestria, so there was no magic for that world to dwell in, so she wouldn't have been able to manifest. Keep up, this will be on the test. Long story short, she wasn't able to fully manifest in the human realm due to the lack of magic, but she was able to find a parallel human world whose Equestria hadn't been decimated yet, so the human world still had a source of magic to pull from. All she needed was from the girls to use their magical pony powers to give her the supercharge that she needed to connect to the magic back in Equestria. Essentially, she just needed the girls to pop the cork on the magic of the world so she could finally manifest. And they did. Like suckers. It's a perfectly convoluted plan befitting a horror movie villain. So here she stands now with twisted wings made of bone and flesh, and a horn made of lollipop hovering over her subjects like some sort of twisted candy queen alicorn. The Candy Mare does say that, hey, I'm not gonna kill you yet because I like you girls. You're the whole reason I was able to be here in the first place, so we're gonna play a game. We're gonna play hide and seek, okay? You run, and I'm gonna count as high as I can, and just try to live. If you get away, you live. If my ghouls or me find you, you die, okay? Go. As Candy begins to count, Granny Smith comes up with a fire axe from below and cuts them an escape path. But suddenly, as they're going through the hallways, the Candy Mare erupts from Granny Smith, causing, well, a shower of blood and organs. Yeah, it turns out Candy got tired of counting, so she drags Applejack into a mouth that's now in Granny Smith's chest. Really love the Thing inspiration there, until Rainbow Dash just kind of goes crazy, grabbing the fire axe that Granny Smith had off the floor and hacks the monster and Applejack to bits, claiming that, hey, it was the only way to save her and stop her. She wouldn't have wanted to turn into one of those things. I swear, if at some point Pinky gets a chainsaw and says groovy, I'm gonna lose my shit. But before the argument between Rainbow Dash and Sunset Shimmer can really escalate, Fluttershy gets overwhelmed and runs off on her own, and the girls go after her. See, now they're better friends than me, because if I was in this kind of situation, I would just let her go. You're dead, girl. I'm getting the fuck out of here. As she's running through a hallway, she gets caught in a candy floss web, and a horrific spider version of the Candy Mare crawls out from the ceiling, reciting a nice little nursery rhyme. Little Miss Fluttershy ran away to have a cry. Weeping, she lost her way, when along came a spider to burrow inside her and eat all her flesh away. At that moment, a swarm of candy spiderlings swarmed the hallway and tried to get their way into Fluttershy's body before Rainbow Dash shows up with a fire axe saying, not yet, bitch, and cuts the Candy Mare's head in two with the fire axe, causing the creature to scurry back into the ceiling. And then after stomping out all the spiderlings, they have a bit of a heart-to-heart and a good cry. But it doesn't last very long because as the others show up, the candy-coated carapace spider thing, the candy spider, I don't know, comes back down from the ceiling and engulfs Fluttershy in a candy floss cocoon. And Dash manages to attack the monster again, but by the time she opens the cocoon, it's too late as Fluttershy has been partially liquefied, which is a great reference to Killer Clowns from Outer Space. So Rainbow Dash just kind of flies off the handle, chopping the body of the Candy Mare to bits with the axe uncontrollably as she sobs and screams, and then the Candy Mare basically just pulls like a huff. I'm glad that's not me, as she appears next to Sunset Shimmer and the other girls. As she looks at Rainbow Dash, she says, "Oh, that's unfortunate. I broke her," and then makes a fist, causing all the candy floss to condense around Rainbow Dash, stopping her. And then she opens her fist, and the candy floss just rips Rainbow Dash to pieces. And wow, that is also a great reference to Alien vs. Predator. I told you, it's a series that wears its inspirations on its sleeve. Man, I don't like seeing all these characters die again. Sunset Shimmer's gonna be the only one who survives, isn't she? She's gonna be our final girl. Candy disappears as the lights go out, and the recent slaughter of her two friends seems to be attracting the horde of ghouls. So the girls are forced to push through the blood and viscera that used to be Rainbow Dash, and they make it out of the entrance of the school, where they find that the paramedics that had showed up due to the mass chaos have also been turned into zombies, as one of the zombified paramedics leans down into his radio and goes, "Send backup," which I think is a reference to Dawn of the Dead. Just as our heroes are about to lose hope, a white van comes careening through the lawn, taking out several ghouls as it screeches to a halt, and the door opens, revealing Saitwai saying, "Come with me if you want to live." She doesn't say that, she just says get in, but I thought if we're referencing a bunch of other 80s movies, we might as well throw a Terminator reference in there. They pile into the van, slamming the door shut in the hand of one of the ghouls, severing it, and yeah, you know where this is. It's like The Thing, right? The hand springs to life and attacks Pinkie Pie, and everybody freaks out until Rarity grabs a jar and traps the creature in the jar and puts it in a crate. So yeah, the curse is kind of also like The Thing, because every part of these things is alive and capable of mutating and fending for itself, but they're all also connected to the Candy Mare as puppets and serve as her eyes and ears, so it's like a weird hive mind zombie thing, kind of like the Flood. I don't know. Twilight drives them around town as they realize that this plague is quickly spreading throughout the town, but they did come up with a plan to head to Twilight's secret lab to stock up on supplies that she may have borrowed from Crystal Prep over the years. So you may be asking, where do they go from here? Well, shut up, dummy. That's the name of the chapter. They use the supplies in Twilight's lab, along with the severed hand and a mirror, to build a makeshift mirror portal that Sunset theorizes that using the hand as a conduit for both magic and coordinates, that it will be able to take her through the portal to the Candy Mare's Equestria of Origin, which hopefully once she gets there, she can find a way to stop the Candy Mare once and for all. Hopefully, this is all hypothetical, by the way. Rarity finally comes down to the lab. When they got to the mansion, the lab is underneath Twilight's family manor, by the way. She went up to shower because she was covered in blood, and she comes back in a beautiful dress that ends up being made of rock candy that then squishes her and kills her. The dress also ends up being the Candy Mare. I didn't realize that the Candy Mare was freaky like that. Call her the Freaky Mare. Yeah, it was pretty dumb, because like I said, every single part of any of these ghouls are all connected to the Candy Mare and serve as her eyes and ears, so she knew where they were going the whole time. The Candy Mare quickly dispatches Twilight by throwing her into a machine, and then she has a bit of a tussle with Maud, who also shows up, by the way, out of nowhere. Pinkie also gets eaten. She tries to open the door to escape, but gets grabbed by a horde of ghouls and torn apart. In front of Maud, by the way. Maud then switches on the portal and urges Sunset to jump through, and she does, causing a huge explosion that wipes out the ghouls and levels the mansion. The portal actually works, and Sunset wakes up in her pony form in Equestria, but obviously not her Equestria. It's a decimated Equestria that's already been ravaged by the Candy Mare, but she is in Canterlot Castle. After grabbing a cloak and casting a few spells on herself to make her more stealthy, she heads out towards the Canterlot archives. Hopefully, she can find an answer to this. In the archives, she uses dark magic to access the forbidden section of the archives in order to look for the dark magics within, where she finds a copy of the book Ye Olde Tricks and Treats. You know, a good old important book. And just as she reaches the chapter about the Candy Mare, a small filly appears behind her, startling her. This little filly's name is Pumpkin Patch, and she's one of the few survivors of the Candy Mare's rampage through Equestria. So Sunset manages to surmise from the old book that Luna defeated the Candy Mare by separating her spirit from her body and binding the body in one of the stone statues of Nightmare Moon, the very one that just so happens to be in Canterlot. So the monster's been rampaging through countless worlds, basically as a shade with no real body to call her own, which is once again why she needed a host to cross through dimensions in the first place. Sunset's plan is pretty plain. She finds the body and destroys it, which should, in theory, cause the Candy Mare to fade out of existence, since the body is the conduit through which the curse originated from and is still stemming from to this day. The little filly agrees to help Sunset destroy the Candy Mare and leads her to the statue, where we get a bombshell drop that Pumpkin Patch is the Candy Mare. Well, at least she's the pony half that was bound in the statue. You see, Luna thought that she had defeated the Candy Mare by binding Pumpkin Patch in the statue and separating the curse from her body, but realistically all she ended up doing was separating the humanity from the monster, so to speak. I mean, they're not humans, but you get the idea. After Sunset gives the tiny spirit a hug, saying she's so sorry for everything that she's been put through, the Candy Mare shows up and swallows the little spirit whole. Another one bites the dust. Sunset manages to erect a barrier around herself and the statue to protect herself from the Candy Mare, where they have a bit of a, villain monologue moment, but Sunset then blows open the statue, revealing the tiny little preserved corpse of Pumpkin Patch that she then proceeds to incinerate with magic, causing the ghouls and the Candy Mare to erupt into green flames, burning away. The Candy Mare burns away with a shriek as flames consume the town, with Sunset having used most of her strength, accepts that this is the end for her. She's going to die amongst the flames until little Pumpkin Patch grabs her and leads her out of the flames back into the castle. But the Candy Mare isn't quite done yet, as in one last action of trying to get revenge, she knocks Canterlot Castle off of the cliffside that it's situated on. Sunset manages to spot the mirror portal under the corner of her eye and manages to fling herself through it, landing herself back in her home dimension. But she's met with the horrible sight of many of the people laid burning from the inside out, crying and screaming in agony. You see, it turns out the candy curse actually affects humans differently. See, not all of them were fully turned, so now a lot of them are burning from the inside out as the curse is purged from them, and most of their bodies along with it, but they're still alive. CHS goes up in flames, and the Candy Mare's human body is somehow still alive and kicking, although beginning to fall apart as it rose from the wreckage of the school and attacks Sunset, who quickly grabs a piece of wood from the wreckage and mercilessly beats the corpse to death before setting it on fire for good measure. Well, it's not quite a happy ending, as Sunset gets blamed for burning the school and everything that happened, and when she tries to tell the truth, she's immediately deemed incompetent and tossed in the loony bin under the care of one Dr. Lemon Drop. He experiments on her, driving her mad and ending the story on one hell of a cliffhanger, as the visage of the Candy Mare appears before Sunset as she wished for death. Not yet, but soon, Nightmare Night will come again, a nightmare of their own making. The entity bent down and lifted Sunset's chin with one long clawed finger, and lifted her gaze so that she looked Lemon Drop right in his cold, calculating eyes. Snot and tears streamed down Sunset's face, but she couldn't help laughing, sending flecks of foam flying from her mouth that she saw through him, saw to the tomorrow that he thought a mere dream, a mad woman's fantasy. But that would become far more real than he could ever hope to be in his stupid clothes and his fake smile. Candy whispered languidly, "There will be so many sweets to bite," and in spite of herself, Sunset felt her stomach growl. So in reality, you can't really kill the Candy Mare, since yes, she was bound to Pumpkin Patch, but the shade portion is literally just a bunch of angry filly souls held together by spite and hatred. Now it's clung to Sunset Shimmer, offering her the same promise it once offered to little Pumpkin Patch: freedom. Which brings us to Something Sweet Bites Back, and this one gets a little crazy. There's no preamble this time around, as we open with a bat flying through the Everfree forest before it gets snatched and eaten by a mysterious monster. We then cut to Gloriosa Daisy. You remember her from Legend of Everfree, the best Equestria Girls movie. I can't even say it with a straight face. You guys know I love friendship games. But Gloriosa is down on her luck after finding out that CHS has burned to the ground an event that has now been known as the Canterlot High Halloween Massacre. Unfortunately, since CHS won't be coming to the camp this summer, that means she's gonna end up losing the camp to Filthy Rich. Plot from the movie. Pretty good, actually. But whatever. A weird rainstorm ends up coming from the forest and melting all the living things around it, but Gloriosa manages to shield herself from the acidic rain using the magical geodes she'd found in the forest. She makes her way to the cave where she found the geodes to retrieve the rest of them, but is instead met with a weird candy jelly blob filled with the remains of multiple woodland creatures and her brother Timber Spruce. And then she herself is digested by the beast. Oh, okay, so I see now we're going through the horror movie catalog right now. Now we're taking inspiration from The Blob. I haven't seen the original, I've only seen the remake. Well, that was during the summer, so we fast forward to the winter, where Sunset Shimmer is still in the loony bin, and still being haunted by the apparition of the Candy Mare, who appears to be a candified version of Sunset Shimmer. Dr. Lemon Drop is still experimenting on her, trying to discover new treatments, as it seems that the one thing the Candy Mare and Sunset Shimmer have in common is their intense hatred of the man. Diamond Tiara and her father, Filthy Rich, head to Camp Everfree to find it in ruins, where they are attacked by the Jelly Blob, which now has the magical geodes as sort of a makeshift eyes and mouth. And weirdly enough, it mimics Diamond Tiara's voice as she pleads with it to spare her father. Look, I'm skipping over a lot of world building and exposition and things like that because this is not a fanfic reading. So TLDR, Diamond Tiara brings the Candy Blob with her to the first day of classes at Crystal Prep Academy, which is busier than usual since a lot of the students that survived the CHS Halloween Massacre have started at Crystal Prep, since it's pretty much the only high school in the tri-state area. Diamond Tiara manages to pass off the pudgy pink girl as her cousin. I'm sure this will go fine. I'm sure people won't go disappearing. Well, almost immediately the candy thing eats Twist and uses her eyes. This little pudgy thing is going to become way more human-like and smarter as time goes on, isn't it? And then we're all fucked. Even more fucked, I should say. But hey, at least things are looking up for Sunset Shimmer as winter gives way to spring, and more sunlight means the Candy Mare isn't as active, and neither is Lemon Drop, honestly, and she's kind of starting to enjoy the time she has in the asylum, aside from being put in a muzzle, but she's actually starting to, talk with her orderly Sam, and, actually kind of starting to enjoy the food, or about as much as she can, until the Candy Mare finally remanifest, and the two actually have a conversation. The Candy Mare theorizes that someone out there actually believed Sunset's story about what really happened at CHS, and that they're trying to break the curse with science, but science and magic don't mix, so it's not working. They know that the Candy Mare is bound to her, and Dr. Lemon Drop is trying to alter her chemically as a way of curing her or separating her from the curse. But once they realize magic works different than science, they may just resort to the same solution that Luna found all those years ago, and bind Sunset Shimmer and the Candy Mare together in concrete for the next couple thousand years. So to avoid that kind of imprisonment, the Candy Mare offers Sunset a deal, extending her hand out with a single piece of candy in her hand, a lemon drop. According to the Candy Mare, if Sunset eats the lemon drop, she will gain the power of the curse for a short amount of time, with no risk of the Candy Mare taking control, since Sunset's been able to fight her off fine thus far. For better or for worse, Candy Mare and Sunset are connected for the time being, and the Candy Mare would rather them find ways to destroy each other while not being trapped in a padded cell. So, Sunset closes her eyes and opens her mouth. But before she can eat the piece of candy, Lemon Drop comes in and shoves her into the wall, and appears to be staring directly at the apparition of the Candy Mare, which is weird because no one but Sunset has been able to see it up to this point. But what the doctor doesn't notice is that the impact of the wall loosens Sunset's straitjacket just enough for her to slide the piece of candy up her sleeve. Meanwhile, at Crystal Prep, as time goes on, the Candy Blob, or Candy, as it calls itself now, K-C-A-N-D-I-E, you get it, can die, haha, it's clever, has been growing smarter, even learning how to read, as more and more students have gone missing over time. Diamond Tiara then gets kidnapped by the Shadow Bolts, these guys from the friendship games, and they somehow believe that all the missing students are due to Diamond Tiara somehow talking them into dropping out so she can climb the social hierarchy, which... no? They threaten to blackmail her by shaving her head and then taking nude photos of her, which is illegal, by the way. Candy shows up and kills and eats the Shadow Bolts, saving Diamond Tiara, telling her that she'll be saving her for last, which is exactly what you want to hear from an Eldritch horror. Diamond Tiara then goes and vents to Dean Cadence about what's really been happening, which Cadence doesn't really believe the story because, it is kind of far-fetched, but she does start looking into the missing Shadow Bolts, calling their homeroom teachers, who are all reporting the same thing, that the girls are all missing. Just as she's about to start talking to Diamond Tiara, Candy attacks from the ceiling, but Diamond Tiara pushes Cadence out of the way and sacrifices herself, dying a horrible, painful death getting digested by the blob. Cadence then takes off to Principal Cinch's office to warn her about what she just saw, but Principal Cinch has also been taken over by Candy and is under her control. So Cadence is kind of shit out of luck. Meanwhile, it's now Halloween, and Sunset takes the lemon drop and breaks out of her cell, turning into a taffy version of herself, speaking in both her own voice and the Candy Mare's. Okay, so now she's using the Candy Mare like a fucking Venom symbiote, which I think is fucking cool. I think this is genuinely the first series since Rocket to Insanity that I've covered in one of these videos that I have like genuinely enjoyed. Like, Cupcakes was a slog because it was stupid. Muffins made no fucking sense and was dumb as hell, but like, you know, like I still enjoyed it in like a oh so bad it's good kind of way. But like this I actually think is pretty good, and I've been thoroughly enjoyed so far. I don't know, it's just, as someone who loves, you know, MLP and is also a fan of like slasher movies and horror movies, it's kind of just ticking all the boxes for me, you know? Sunset makes quick work of the guards that come to stop her before a fellow prisoner asks to be released to help with the heavy hitters. Sunset rips the door off the hinges and shreds the girl's straitjacket. Turns out this is Starlight Glimmer, who has the power to impose her will on others through mysterious means. Oh, it's peak. Oh my god. Finally. It's just sinking in. This is what it feels like to read a good fan fiction. Oh, it's so good. Thank you to everyone who recommended this series. Well, Dr. Lemon Drop shows up and very quickly KOs Starlight Glimmer with like superhuman speed and strength before he turns into a hulking monster that Sunset kind of recognizes as Fluttershy. Holy shit! The continuity is real! It's Fluttershy from Something Sweet to Bite 2. Yeah, I wonder what happened to her. Well, now you know. She somehow made it to the human world and has been posing as Dr. Lemon Drop to keep tabs on Sunset Shimmer and the Candy Mare. Okay, you know, on second, you know, this is kind of giving me like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. kind of vibes now. Not sure if that's a good thing or not yet. Back at Crystal Prep Academy, Dean Keynes is running for her life as most of the students and faculty have fallen under Candy's control, and she somehow manages to make it down into Twilight's basement lab, where she somehow finds a secret passageway that leads to a secret lab, where she is apprehended by guards and led to Twilight Sparkle. Huh. She's alive. I could have sworn that, you die when a building gets dropped on you, but hey, whatever. Well, meanwhile, down the lower levels of that same facility, Sunset tries to talk to Fluttershy, but she just ain't having it, as this Fluttershy has dedicated her life to murdering and slaughtering every puppet of the Candy Mare in an attempt to wipe out the demon once and for all. So Sunset, instead of trying to fight Fluttershy on the limited time she has, she just grabs Starlight and starts digging a hole up through the ceiling. Yeah, this is basically the SCP Foundation. Twilight, during her explanation to Cadence, even name drops D-class personnel. It goes full on SCP as Twilight gives a briefing in the auditorium about the Candy Mare dubbed SCP-22639, aka Sunset / the Candy Mare, and SCP's 22639B, aka Candy, and her puppets dubbed SCP-22639C. And how dangerous they can all be. You know, SCP jargon actually does kind of make sense when you're talking about the Candy Mare and her ghouls, but we're getting deep into fanfiction territory here. As if we weren't already knee-deep in it already. Sunset and Starlight make their way into the city sewers just as the Lemon Drop powers run out and Sunset returns to normal. They hide from a patrolling Fluttershy as Sunset talks to the Candy Mare, who's now taken a candied form of Starlight Glimmer. And the Candy Mare offers to help her take care of Fluttershy since she wants to tie up that loose end for good. Meanwhile, look, I know I've been saying meanwhile a lot, but this story's been jumping back and forth. There's a lot of things going on right now. Meanwhile, the EQG SCP Foundation are trying and failing to contain Candy back at Crystal Prep. Well, then we go back down to the sewers and the Candy Mare distracts Fluttershy since she can see her, allowing Sunset to sneak up behind her and knock her out with a sewer grate. But then she gets knocked out by Starlight Glimmer with an iron rod, and dragged away. Sunset wakes up to the sight of Starlight hollowing out Fluttershy's skull with a spoon so the Candy Mare could then inhabit it, which she does. But Starlight now believes that the Candy Mare is a goddess. Oh yeah, Starlight can see the Candy Mare now because as the Candy Mare's strength increases, she can project herself onto others. So Starlight is now convinced that the Candy Mare is a goddess and is helping her. So the Candy Mare now possesses the hollowed out Fluttershy, but thankfully, Twilight and Cadence managed to show up, and Twilight uses a magic containment device around her neck to turn into Midnight Sparkle and obliterate Fluttershy's body and the Candy Mare, at least for the time being. Remember, we've established she doesn't die. I mean, I literally wrote it right here. No hope. She doesn't stay dead. They grab Sunset and head back to the facility, and Twilight theorizes that the Candy Monster's actual goal is to kill Sunset in order to free the Candy Mare. I mean, yeah, that makes sense. It's trying to reunite with its brains. It's essentially a body without a brain, or a body without a soul. Well, unfortunately, the slime monster does manage to kill Sunset, which does free the Candy Mare. F's in chat for Sunset Shimmer. She was best final girl, and also giving the Candy Mare a new body in the process. Twilight is in the main control room trying to deactivate the nuke. Oh yeah, there's a nuke, you know, standard SAP protocol. If there's any type of containment breach, they arm the nuke and blow the whole facility up in hopes of taking whatever escaped along with it. But Twilight's trying to stop the nuke in the main control room, so she's approached by someone who turns out to be Starlight. I was wondering what happened to her. And Twilight sprays her with bear mace, and I just think the scene is really funny because Starlight's like, what the hell was that? And Starlight's like, yeah, it was bear mace, but you know, it's been enhanced to affect SCPs, so it's probably really gonna suck for you. Starlight was just a distraction though, so she could open the blast door, and a little girl steps in, the Candy Mare reborn. Again, Twilight manages to stall long enough for her magic containment device to recharge so she can turn back into Midnight Sparkle. But it doesn't really matter because the Candy Mare has the power of the 7 magical geodes, which offers her all the same powers that they have, like super speed, super strength, magical shields, talking to animals, but that doesn't come up, and also the ability to see what others feel, which comes in handy when she touches Twilight and learns about the nuke. Candy Mare then gets Starlight to try to use her power to force Twilight to deactivate the nukes, but before Starlight can give the order, Cadance comes to the rescue and stabs Starlight through the throat with a piece of metal shrapnel. As Twilight cackles with glee, gloating to the Candy Mare about how she finally beat the monster, the nuke goes off, ending the madness once and for all. No, come on. I can't believe you fell for that again. There's like 3 more stories to go. Come on. Starlight actually wakes up in Equestria as a pony, eager to continue her goddess's work. Which brings us to something sweet to bite, the Curse of the Candy Cult. Well, thankfully this story wastes no time getting into the meat and potatoes, as it starts right out with Twilight and her friends confronting Starlight, who quite literally births the Candy Mare in front of them, with her body splitting open, revealing the tiny little candy filly, who introduces herself at Pumpkin Patch and sings happy birthday to herself. There's some good old bit of body horror there. You know, I'm not quite sure about you guys, but for some reason in my head, when I read the Candy Mare's voice when she's like in the form of a filly or a child, I hear Cozy Glow's voice when she talks. Maybe that's just me, but I think it's fitting. I'm pretty bored at this point. Look, all you need to know is that Candy Mare does her thing and causes chaos, and it ends when the surviving characters, mainly AJ Rarity and Starscroll the Bearded, cast a spell using the Pillar's magical artifacts to send the Candy Mare off to Limbo. Look, I'm sorry. As much as I've enjoyed all of these, I think the series is starting to suffer from the same problems as like the slasher franchises that it takes inspiration from, and that's repetition and fatigue. It's not a bad story by any means. The cult is fine. It's just a little predictable. You know, I just feel like we're retreading familiar ground, you know? Especially after how much of a shark jump Something Sweet Bites Back was. But the good thing is that this story leads us to like probably like my second favorite story of this whole franchise, and that's Candy Mare Goes to Hell. Because every horror franchise villain has to go to hell at least once. Candy Mare Goes to Hell opens with the Candy Mare trying to sustain herself on the shade she finds around her, but they just phase out of her and regenerate. Then Lemon Drop appears before her, because of course he's in hell. He was a madman who murdered children, and he welcomes his daughter to hell. Candy Mare lunges at her former tormentor, but obviously she can't touch him, he's incorporeal. But he does say that he was sent by the Master of Hell to retrieve her for her final judgment, but beforehand he'll give her a bit of a tour to hell. So, what do you think of the odds that this story takes a Dante's Inferno approach? Turns out the Candy Mare was in the Circle of Lust, which makes sense because the punishment for lust is the incorporeality that the Shades experienced, unable to make physical contact with another. The sinners then pass into the next circle, which is gluttony, which is a torrential downpour filled with mud and maggots, as all the Shades there engorge themselves on the mud and maggots until their stomachs burst in a never-ending cycle of gluttony. Eventually they make it out, and they make it to the River Styx, where they meet the ferryman of the River Styx. Excuse me, his name is kind of hard to pronounce. I believe it's Phlegius? Well, that means we are going the Dante's Inferno route, because that is the ferryman of the River Styx in the Divine Comedy. After crossing the River Styx, the pair end up in the city of despair, dismay, disappointment, you name it, where they are accosted by demons until they are saved by Grogar, which, okay, was not expecting to see Grogar here, but it's nice, I guess. Yeah, it turns out Grogar ended up in hell because he tried to step into hell as sort of like a loophole. Figured he would step in and then step out back into Equestria behind the barriers that Gusty the Great set up to guard his bewitching bell. Yeah, it turns out once you get into hell, there's really no getting out, even for a powerful immortal like Grogar, though he is weakened without his bell. So Grogar gets them out of the city and guides them to the Master's lair, where we learn that the Master is... no. The Master of Hell is Cozy Glow. You know, somehow that makes sense to me. Cozy Glow explains that Lemon Drop and Candy Mare are inexplicably linked, so really the only thing keeping this Candy Mare from fading out of existence is her first victim, Lemon Drop. Ooh, you can taste the irony. Cozy Glow gives the Candy Mare an ultimatum. Either you spend an eternity in hell with Lemon Drop, or face oblivion. But she then offers a third option. Cozy Glow says she will give the Candy Mare a body, an actual host, and bring her back to life, which will inadvertently bring Lemon Drop back to life with her, in exchange for her helping her attack the higher spheres of existence. Well, with those options, Candy Mare agrees to help Cozy Glow, who leads her to a pit leading to the 9th circle of hell, which the Candy Mare jumps into with gusto, yelling, "Cannonball!" Okay, so we've reached the point where most horror franchises reach, where it goes from being scary to just being funny, to being like a parody of itself. You know, kind of like Nightmare on Elm Street. You know, Freddy used to be really scary, and then he started being funny, and then he really wasn't that scary anymore. So the Candy Mare lands in the deepest layers of hell in the frozen 9th circle, where she digs out a body and burrows into it before the icy limbs pull her and the body beneath the ice. Yeah, you can see where this is going. Candy Mare ends up taking over hell, but Lemon Drop does come back to life after draining Grogar's magic and disappearing through a shadowy portal. Hopefully that goes somewhere. And the Candy Mare spreads throughout hell, and the story ends with her knocking on those pearly gates. But we're not done yet, because like most horror franchises, once it gets to the comedic standpoint, you gotta reboot it to bring it back, which brings us to something sweet to bite, a new generation. This story actually marks another first for me, since it's the first G5 fanfic that I have covered on this video series, but it's also the first G5 fanfic I've ever read. I mean, I kept up with, you know, I watched the movie, I've watched Make Your Mark, and I've watched a few episodes of Tell Your Tale, so I'm not a complete stranger to G5 and the characters, but I just never really had any interest in reading fanfics up until now. We open on Nightmare Night in Maritime Bay, as little fillies and colts are all running around, trick-or-treating in their cute little costumes. Beautiful time of year. Jazz is bidding farewell to the last few guests from her Nightmare Night party before she goes looking for Rocky when the power goes out. She suddenly runs into a mysterious mare sitting in front of one of the mirrors before the lights turn on. I mean, she mistakes the mare's gory appearance as just a Halloween costume, because yeah, I mean, you would. It is Nightmare Night after all. That is up until she then notices Rocky's corpse in the distance, split from groin to chin. Oh, poor Rocky. And she notices two words written on the wall in congealing blood. Candy Mare. Uh-oh. Jazz is then grabbed by the creature's licorice hair and whipped into various pieces of furniture before the beasts feast on her. Oh no! Not Jazz and Rocky. Anyway, we then cut to Posey. Oh, I know Posey, she's the racism pony. Posey answers the door expecting a trick-or-treaters, but sees an empty street and a foul smell hits her nostrils. When she goes back into her house, she notices a mysterious Mare standing at her kitchen sink, pouring herself a glass of water. Posey confronts the intruder, only for them to grab a butcher's knife and start mercilessly slashing at her. Posey manages to run up to her bedroom, but fails to close the door, and is jumped on by the Candy Mare, who stabs her mercilessly with a knife. Posey desperately tries to crawl across the floor to her phone because I forget they have phones in G5. It's a little weird, but okay. Where she tries to call her parents, but unfortunately she is murdered by the Candy Mare before she can make the call. So this is kind of a return to form for the Candy Mare. Like I said, it's kind of like it's like the Nightmare on Elm Street reboot of the franchise. For better or for worse, depending on if you like that or not. I'm kind of indifferent to it. It was better than a New Nightmare, at least. But at least a New Nightmare had interesting ideas. I'm getting off topic. We then cut to Misty Bright Dawn as she's running a haunted house in Maritime Bay in the hopes of attracting Sunny and her friends, mainly so she can get a hold of Sparky and steal some of his dragon magic for Opaline. But unfortunately, her attraction has proven to be a little too successful as it seemingly attracted half the population of Maritime Bay. Hope she charged for admission. Well, the crowded haunted house turns out to be the perfect hunting ground for our favorite candy-coated cannibalistic cadaver, who enters the attraction and quickly dispatches of all the ponies inside, before cutting the power. Misty then has to make her way out through the dark, stepping in mysterious bodily fluids and feeling fresh, wet bones rubbing up against her fur. Ugh. But hey, she actually does make it out, but then the door of the attraction creaks open and a single piece of candy tumbles out that Misty takes and just eats. And if it's one thing that we have to have learned by now, is don't eat the candy. Just don't do it. It's not a good idea. It's never worked out in any of these stories. We then cut to Sunny and her friends as they walk up the hill towards the Crystal Bright House. Now, the Crystal Bright House is like their house, kind of. It's like their version of the Castle of Friendship, I guess, but we don't know where it came from. There's never any explanation for where it came from. I do remember that. After getting settled, Hitch chases after Sparky, who runs into the kitchen, where he finds the Candy Mare, who has put the baby dragon inside of a blender and stares directly into Hitch's eyes before hitting the puree button, blending the poor little dragon to bits. The Candy Mare then mimics Sunny's voice, saying, "Hey, it's a new flavor of smoothie that I just came up with," and pours him a glass and slides it across the table before downing the rest of the pitcher. Okay, come on. That's pretty good. I love when she mimics voices. It's good. And then she knocks Hitch out with the blender. Zip then walks into the kitchen, where she is met with the horrible sight of Hitch pinned to the table, and I quote, with every single piece of cutlery they owned, with the remains of Sunny's blender stuck in his gut, still whirring away. As Zip is processing the scene that she sees before her, the Candy Mare appears from the fog. We then cut to Pip and Izzy, who are watching scary movies, when all of a sudden a pony is thrown through the doorway into the wall hard enough to leave cracks throughout the wall. The pony had been picked clean of most of her flesh, but even more sickening, she was still alive. Pip's eyes widened as she realizes that the mutilated pony is what remained of her sister. Zip weakly begs her sister to leave her and run away to get help, but Pip instead just grabs her phone and tries to call for help, but it doesn't go well because she's met with the following message. The number you've dialed has been disconnected permanently. If you have reached this number in error, then hang up and wait to die. I'll be with you shortly. An ear-piercing giggle then erupted from the phone as the screen flashed rapidly through various pictures of Zip being torn to shreds. Photos taken with Zip's phone by some horrifying candy-coated mare that posed in several for a selfie that Pip had never laid eyes on before. Then the screen went dark and unresponsive. There was a pop, and a puff of smoke rose from the device. She's hacking phones now. So 21st century. Candy Mare then appears and eats Pip and Izzy after brutally torturing them. We then cut to Sunny Starscout in her Nightmare Moon costume as she's washing up in the bathroom. Then, she suddenly gets flashes of all the horrible crimes that the Candy Mare has committed throughout the night. She then ascends the elevator of the Crystal Bright House to the Unity Chamber where the Unity Crystals are held. Those are 3 crystals that they united from the movie to bring magic back to Equestria. This will actually be important. Once the elevator reaches the chamber, she sees the Candy Mare standing in front of the crystals and confronts the creature. The Candy Mare actually explains that when they reunited the Unity Crystals and brought magic back to Equestria, they also brought dark magic back with it, which in turn brought back the Candy Mare. Which, kind of makes sense. So Sunny taps into her Alicorn magic and uses it to obliterate the Candy Mare once and for all. No, I'm just kidding. She dies. She gets killed by her friends who have resurrected as candy ghouls. The story then ends with Opaline blowing up herself and her castle in a fiery ball of magic, taking herself out, and the Candy Mare with her. Nah, I'm just kidding. The Candy Mare survives. There's a scene where you see pieces of candy burrowing into the ground, waiting for next Nightmare Night. So, we've established she cannot die. There is no killing this bitch. Can't keep a good horror icon down. She's like William Afton at this point. She always comes back. But that concludes the Something Sweet to Bite series. At least until Knackerman decides to write another one, because you never know, he might. I mean, Something Sweet to Bite: A New Generation was written a year ago in 2023, so... And he did leave the door open for the Candy Mare to come back, so you never know. So thank you to everyone who recommended this series to me. It was actually very enjoyable. I love 80s slasher movies, and this wears inspirations from all of those types of movies on its sleeve in the best way possible. I was literally able to understand all the references from the movies that it was referencing. So my favorite entry has to be a toss-up between either Something Sweet to Bite 2 or Something Sweet Bites Back. I really like Candy Mare Goes to Hell, but not because it's scary, just because how absurd it is. I'm hoping that this video gets out by Halloween. If not, might be a few days late. But in case I do get it out on Halloween, I'm the wild card. And I'll see you next time. Happy Halloween, everybody. And remember, always check your candy.